Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're going to talk about the Suicide Squad and its opening box office in US cinemas and its performance and overall what it means going ahead, not only for the superhero genre but also for big budget movies in general. Now, after being released in US cinemas on August the 5th, 2021, the Suicide Squad grossed only $26.5 million over the weekend, which isn't very good considering the film's $185 million budget. The movie's worldwide overall total stands at currently $72.2 million. Now, there's been a lot of debate on the film's underperformance, primarily in fandom and social media. Many conversations about why the reasons for the movie's failure, and despite the general positive reception it got from both fans and critics. Now, you could check out my own non-spoiler and spoiler reviews on the movie itself, and I will leave the links within the description and the end title cards of this video as well. Now, for me, when I look at the movie's performance, for the most part, I'm not really surprised, even though 26.5 million is very low for a superhero movie. But I'm looking at a lot of conversations online, and I think there's a certain amount of people that are really either missing or denying or failing to realise exactly the reasons why this film underperformed, and I think they're quite obvious, to be honest with you. Now, the first main reason, of course, is that whilst making nearly 750 million worldwide, the first Suicide Squad movie was very much maligned amongst both fans and critics, and whether this new movie is a sequel or a soft reboot, the fact is it's still got that same name, The Suicide Squad, and that obviously ties a lot of association to the first film, so anybody who hated the first film wouldn't come back for the second film. The film's R-rated tone obviously will alienate a lot of younger audiences who were into superhero movies at the time. Now, many won't want to admit this, but the DCEU as a cinematic universe is still very divisive amongst general audiences and hardcore fans as well. For most fans, despite the amount of content being released, there really isn't the same amount of familiarity that the MCU has had with audiences over the last 8 to 10 years. And with the MCU, there remains a certain confidence and reliance on that franchise. People know when you go to see a Marvel movie, at the very least you will be entertained on some sort of base level. Now, unfortunately, when we look at the DCEU, movies such as Man of Steel, Birds of Prey, Batman vs Superman, all still leave a very bad aftertaste for people, and that damages the DCEU brand as a whole, of which the Suicide Squad is a part of. Also, we look at what pulled audiences in for the first film. Now, the Suicide Squad back then was very much of a fresh novelty. Instead of dealing with the more inspirational heroes, you're dealing much more with a misfit ragtag group of supervillains, and this is very much the DCEU's answers to the Guardians of the Galaxy set by Marvel. Obviously, of course, you had Will Smith that time, who was still a big movie star, and people were excited to see what the Suicide Squad would look like in live action. Well, all of those factors are gone now. Now, despite the fact that I think Idris Elba is probably a better actor than Will Smith, he's not as near the big prolific movie star that Will Smith was. And of course now, the Suicide Squad, we've seen it in so many animated movies and series recently that the whole novelty of seeing the Suicide Squad on screen doesn't have the same allure and hype as what it did going back in 2016. Now, of course, the biggest reason is the obvious streaming day-to-day release with HBO Max, which is what would hurt the box office. Now, we've talked about this so many times, most recently, of course, with Black Widow, and how much the Disney Plus streaming release hurt that film's second box office weekend performance. This issue was, of course, intensified even more when lead actress Scarlett Johansson sued Disney, claiming lost payments due to the fact that the theatrical box office was affected by the Disney Plus streaming release. Now, along with Black Widow and of course most recently Jungle Cruise and now the Suicide Squad, it really does confirm, if not already, that this whole initiative behind the same day-to-day streaming just isn't a viable enterprise in the long term. And I think eventually we're going to see a lot of planned movies revert back to the theatrical only release. And I believe that's certainly the case for the likes of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which opens in September this year, and also Marvel's The Eternals, which I still believe is slated for November. And I don't think we can really be surprised when we look at the upcoming DCEU films, the Batman starring Robert Pattinson, the Aquaman sequel, and also the Shazam sequel. I think we can firmly expect now that those will also be theatrical releases as well. So I think ultimately the penny has dropped that whilst, okay, studios may take near 100% of all of the gross in terms of the streaming revenues, it just isn't a sustainable long-term plan in terms of releasing your content. I've said multiple times that the streaming platforms should rely a lot more on the monthly series and music videos and documentaries as opposed to theatrical movies overall. And I think this underperformance of Suicide Squad validates that theory. So looking at all of those reasons, again, I'm not really surprised by the film's underperformance. I think you have to be consistent, and if many people are deeming Black Widow a flop, which currently now is coming close to 400 million worldwide, if we're saying that was a financial underperformer, then Suicide Squad has to be a super flop and a super underperformer overall. Now, of course, we can go back and say, yes, COVID is a factor, and yes, it was, of course, and we relate to certain variants, whether they're apparent or not. Again, take of that what you will, whether you believe that or not. But the fact is, we have had a recent string of movies, when we look at the likes of Fast 9, Godzilla vs. Kong, and A Quiet Place Part 2. All of those movies have been very successful at the box office, proving that people are willing to go to theatres to watch the movies if they deem the film worthy enough. And sadly, people may not like to admit this, but the Suicide Squad just wasn't deemed an excitable and hyped up enough project to get people going into theatres overall. And a lot of people I've seen online, they're trying to come up with certain excuses, maybe blaming review bombing or the fact that a lot of the Snyder Cut people were turning away from this movie. But I really don't think that's the case. I just think Suicide Squad just wasn't a lot of hype. If you look at the traction that was gained or wasn't gained from the trailers overall, the R-rated tone turned off a lot of viewers, the fact the day-to-day streaming of HBO Max, and also the fact that the first film wasn't very well received. So if you don't like the first film, you're not going to turn up for the second film. So when you look at all of those factors, I'm really not surprised. Maybe 26.5 is very low. I was probably looking at maybe 40 to 50 million, but the fact that it's fallen so low, and again, we'll probably expect a huge drop in the second weekend, as what we saw with Black Widow as well. Again, the fact that the movie was budgeted at 185 million and it's not going to gross anywhere near that. I think this film would do very well to get anywhere near 200 million overall. But we'll wait and see what happens in the next upcoming and weeks overall. But overall, those are just my quick thoughts and feelings and analysis on the recent box office underperformance of the Suicide Squad. As I said before, you can check out my review on the channel, and I will leave the links of it in the description as well. But overall, what do you think about this? Let me know what you think in the comments. What were the real reasons for the underperformance of this movie? Do you think there was certain bias? Do you believe in the review bombing? Or do you just think there just wasn't enough hype for the Suicide Squad sequel? And do you think we will see a further sequel for the Suicide Squad? Or will Warner Brothers deem it cause at this case and they will push on with much more smaller scale projects, particularly on the HBO Max, is what we're seeing in particular with both Batgirl and Blue Beetle, as well as the much vaunted Black Superman project, whatever that is. Not really interested in that overall. But will we see a much more smaller scaling down in terms of the film's budgets overall, not only just in superhero genre, but just in live action big event films overall, as studios have got to weigh up the cost now that maybe these $200 million movies are not a viable enterprise anymore, and they've really got to think a lot more in terms of making the films far more better in terms of quality, rather than just going all out and hoping that the concept and certain outrage or trends on Twitter will be enough to carry the film overall and make them successful in the long run. But those are my overall thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit and like those subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.